one of the fall activities is harvesting gourds. And with us today is Dr. Becky Johnson, a professor of botany here at OSU, and she's going to tell us a little bit about gourds. And Becky, thank you for being with us today.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Well, Becky, you've brought quite a lot of gourds here, and one of the first questions that people ask is, when do you need to harvest the gourds?
Okay, well, gourds originated in a tropical environment, so they're used to a long growing season. So you probably should think of them like you would melons, a watermelon or something like that, or a pumpkin that would need the full growing season to mature. On the other hand, some of the smaller ones may mature somewhere in July or August, and you can tell that if the stem turns brown. So if you're looking at a bunch of gourds on a vine, they'll start to lose weight. They'll start to dry down, and you can just heft them on the vine, and you can tell they're not as heavy as a watermelon. They're losing water, and they're feeling a little lighter. And then when that stem turns brown, then that gourd has developed as much as it's going to. Now, it may not be fully mature, and it may shrivel up when it goes to dry, but it's not going to get any more nutrients in. It's not going to develop anymore once the stem turns brown. So this gives you an idea of when to harvest. Another thing is that the color turns somewhat lighter. These were dark, the color of grass, and then they tend to turn lighter. And actually, if you just left them hang on the vine, eventually the cells of the peel would die out and you get yellow, just like leaves dying on a tree in the fall.
Okay, so mainly look for that stem and
the brown stem, the lightening of weight, the decrease in weight when you heft it, and even if it's hanging from a vine, you can lift it a little bit and feel if it's getting lighter.
Okay. Now another question that people have is, we're coming up on our first freeze here, and if the vines go ahead and freeze, what happens to those gourds that haven't matured yet?
Okay. Well, any of the gourds can be left out in the field, and some of the ones I'm going to show you today, I'm sure have been left in the field until maybe the next spring or summer, and they just will dry out naturally in the field. If they haven't reached maturity yet, they'll probably shrivel and rot. And so if you want to avoid the trouble of picking them all and then having some useful and some not, leaving them in the field's a good idea, because you can go out the next spring and the ones that are nice and dry, you can take them in and work with them, and the ones that have collapsed or rotted, you just leave there.
Okay. Well, once you've picked them, what's our next step here?
Okay, the next thing you need to do is dry the gourd, and you can either peel it before or after drying it. You do need to remove the peel, and this is something maybe some people don't know. If you tried to just apply paint or some decoration or something to this, that would not be very permanent, because eventually this peel is going to slough off. If you can imagine, if this were a wooden apple or a wooden pear, you've got a very thin peeling on it, but that is going to flake off, and this is one that was left in the field, and the peel on it then has dried. You can see how flaky it is. Let me get my little knife out here and I can show you that it'll flake off, and the wood, the brown wood, is underneath this. Now, normally I wouldn't try to clean it by scraping it when it's dry that way. The way to get it off of something like this is wet it, and either put it in a basin of water and just allow it to get damp, or even wrap it in damp paper towels or newspapers, or put it inside a plastic bag and let it soften. Then you can just scrub it off with steel wool or a scouring pad, or it's a lot easier to remove. And so that's what I've done with these, for example. These look like that, and to get it out of all these crevices and that with a knife or something would be very hard. With a brush, it just comes right off.
Okay.
So the way you'd scrub vegetables is the way you'd clean this up. Okay, let me show you how thick the peel is. Again, get my little blade out here. Whoops, we don't need the scissors. Yeah, this is one. You can see if I just start cutting here, that's a very thin peel. I mean, it's as thin as, like I say, a pear or an apple, and underneath there is the brown wood. And you can just keep doing this. It would take a lot of patience with this small knife to do this one, but it gives you an idea of how thin and fragile that peel is. It's really almost nothing. It's like a Kleenex or something that thickness, but it does have to be removed or it will flake off later. The other thing is, if you want to accelerate drying, the peel is a barrier to the loss of water, and if you think that maybe this gourd was just barely mature and might rot before it dried, if you didn't do this, peeling them right away is a way to accelerate the drying.
Okay. Now you've got one here that has been done on, and it actually leaves a pattern on the gourd then. It
does, and this is one thing you have to think about. Any treatment you have will give you a difference in appearance. So here you can see where the knife strokes were. And I was coming around it with the curve here, and then I probably switched it and came around this way. Here I was just doing it down the neck, but I don't know any way to get these out. I've tried sandpaper. This is almost like roughing up the grain on wood by sanding it the wrong way. It penetrates into the fibers, and as far as I know, it's permanent. On the other hand, if you were going to spray this with a background of acrylic paint or something, you might not care, and if you were even going to put stains on it and that, you might not mind having a random pattern like that. But here's one that was not cleaned off with a knife. This was allowed to dry, and then when the peel was dry and flaky, it was just scrubbed, and you can see what a clean surface you get on it without those marks. So this might be what you'd want if you were going to do a real intricate pattern, like we have on this little gourd here. You can see this one doesn't have any marks on it, and it gives a nice, almost like a piece of manila paper to work on.
It's very pretty. Now this gourd has a very nice pattern on it, and that's even another treatment that you've given.
This is where the gourd has molded, where it was not dry when it was harvested. There was enough moisture there to support mold growth. And actually these patterns, if you would wet this, you could see it, or certainly if you varnish it, it'll give you something almost like burled oak or burled maple. This can contribute to the appearance of it. And I have several here that have these patterns made by mold on the gourd. And I consider them attractive. I usually do let my gourds mold because I find that more interesting to work with than just the plain pattern, but it depends on what effect you want to achieve.
Okay. Now, Becky, one final note. Working with gourds and doing gourd craft is not something that you're going to go out and harvest and instantly begin your craft, is it?
Right. So you might want to buy some. I would say you can probably buy some locally. The farmer's market, places where they're selling pumpkins, they may sell gourds as well. There are more people getting into growing gourds for commercial production. So I would say at first you'll probably want to buy some dried gourds, so that you can get to work on them right away, and then you could actually take the seeds from them and get into business yourself as far as raising them. Save those seeds, plant them, and you'll get a variety of shapes out. You can't always predict what the result's going to be, but you just have to kind of make use of whatever appears.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for giving us this gourd primer, Becky.
Okay.